The air inside the MGM Grand felt heavy that night, not from heat, but from expectation. Cameras blinked like restless eyes, and the crowd buzzed with that strange energy that lives halfway between excitement and mockery. They hadn't come to see a fight. They'd come to watch a meme breathe. When Jake Paul leaned into the mic and smirked, the audience leaned with him. "Hollywood can't save you here, old man." The place erupted. Laughter, whistles, chants of his name. It was the exact reaction he wanted. Jake looked across the table. The legend sat there, hands folded, expression unreadable. Chuck Norris didn't move, didn't blink. The silence on his end wasn't weakness, it was gravity. One of the reporters, trying to stir the fire, called out, "Mr. Norris, any comment?" Chuck's eyes lifted slowly. His voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "I've seen men laugh like that before," he said, right before they learned what silence sounds like. The laughter faltered. For half a second, the arena forgot what it was supposed to feel. The next day, every clip, every post, every thumbnail had Jake's grin frozen in time. Legend versus YouTuber. The internet meets reality. To Jake, it was perfect marketing. To Chuck, it was just noise. Jake's training sessions looked like music videos, neon lights, sweat glistening on tattoos, playlists blasting. He performed for mirrors and cameras, shadowboxed for an audience that wasn't there to learn, only to like. Chuck trained in silence. No cameras, no entourage, just the echo of a heavy bag, the groan of an old building, and the slow, controlled rhythm of a man who never forgot how to breathe through pain. At 70-something, his body wasn't fast, but his timing was frightening. Every motion was measured, each strike deliberate. No social media, no hashtags. Only repetition, precision, faith. When asked by a local reporter why he'd agreed to the fight, Chuck only said, "Because there's a generation that confuses attention with respect. Maybe it's time to remind them what the difference feels like." Fight night. The lights hit like lightning, white, hot, merciless. The ring looked smaller in person, surrounded by thousands of faces glowing in the dark, phones raised like torches. Jake walked out first, surrounded by dancers and fireworks, music thundering. His robe shimmered in gold letters. The future. Then came Chuck. No music, no entourage, just boots on canvas, steady, grounded. His robe was plain black, the kind used by people who didn't need introductions. The crowd roared Jake's name. Chuck barely seemed to hear it. The referee brought them to the center. Jake grinned. "Still time to back out, Gramps." Chuck looked him dead in the eye. "I don't back out. I walk through." The bell hadn't even rung, but the energy changed. The laughter from the crowd softened, unsure if it was still safe to mock. When the bell finally did sound, sharp, metallic, final, Jake danced forward, quick on his feet, confident, taunting. He threw a few light jabs, smiling for the cameras, feeding the audience. Chuck didn't move. He just watched, shoulders relaxed, breathing even. Jake threw again, faster this time. His glove brushed air. Chuck tilted his head, just enough. The movement was almost lazy. Jake frowned. The crowd laughed. Chuck didn't. He could feel the air change around them, the shift from performance to presence. Jake was still performing. Chuck was already inside something real. Seconds stretched. The noise faded. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. From ringside, one of the commentators leaned toward his mic. "You can feel it," he whispered. "He's not here for a show. He's here for truth." Jake bounced on his feet, trying to recover the rhythm, but it wasn't working. His punches were loud but empty. Chuck's silence was louder. Between movements, Chuck muttered just loud enough for Jake to hear. "Hollywood can't save you here." A pause. "Good. I'm not from Hollywood." Then came the bell, the end of round one. Jake raised his gloves, panting but smiling through it, still trying to look like the winner. Chuck turned away, calm, eyes lowered, as if the real fight hadn't even started yet. The crowd roared for Jake again, but it was different this time, more nervous than confident. They'd come for entertainment, but they could feel something else bleeding through the lights. Something old, something real. And as the camera panned across the ring, catching that stillness in Chuck's face, the commentator said the words that would follow the video everywhere the next morning. "You can mock a man's age, but you can't mock time." And tonight, time just stepped back into the ring. The bell echoed one last time before the next round, and for the first time all night, nobody laughed. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. They tried to turn it into a party. That was the mistake. Between rounds, the arena behaved like a concert venue. Bass deep enough to rattle seatbacks. Cameras prowling for celebrity faces. Bartenders hustling along the aisles with plastic cups that sweated into sticky palms. Jake fed it all like he'd invented electricity. He shouted to friends in the third row, winked at a camera, tugged at his gloves with the swagger of a man who knows the lens loves him. When the bell brought them out again, he raised his hands not to guard, but to greet. Chuck met him at center with nothing but breath. Shoulders loose, chin down, eyes steady. The kind of stillness that makes noise feel juvenile. Jake snapped a jab toward that quiet face. Fast, precise, meant to mark territory. Chuck shifted the distance by an inch. Leather touched nothing. Jake added a second, harder. Same answer. A small tilt, a shoe sliding half a step. No clash, no counter. Just absence where contact should have been. The crowd laughed because laughter fills fear's first space. Jake rewarded them, playing big. He rolled his neck, grinned at a ringside phone held aloft, then dropped his weight and slung a hook he knew would please the highlight editors. Chuck dipped and let it pass, close enough to taste the leather dye. He didn't swing back. He didn't even blink. That's when the cameras stopped cutting away to celebrities. Something about a man not reacting is louder than any punch. Jake tried again. Double jab, feint, right hand with pop. He hit air. The smile faltered and returned too quickly. He began to bounce, a little too high. He looked like he was fighting a reflection he couldn't quite line up. Chuck moved in small economies, a step that closed nothing, an angle that erased options. He was not faster, he was earlier. He read weight before it shifted, impatience before it showed. Each micro-movement taught the room a word it hadn't used all night. Timing. Work, a voice from Jake's corner barked. He obliged, crowd-pleasing as command. Flurry to the body, then upstairs. Chuck let the shots rush past as if he'd opened a door and invited wind through. No drama, no counter to punish. Patience as offense. It made Jake angry in the way a stalled elevator makes you angry. You start pressing buttons harder, as if force changes machinery. He stepped in reckless, tried to crowd. Chuck braced with a forearm, not dirty, just firm, nudged him offline, and reset the distance. Jake stumbled, caught himself, glanced at the ref with a complaint he didn't finish. The ref, bored by theater, waved them on. The arena's sound changed color. Less bright, more metallic. People who'd come to enjoy a spectacle realized they were watching craft and weren't sure how to cheer for it. A man in a high-priced seat lowered his phone and leaned forward. The commentators' voices thinned. "You can feel it," the quieter one said. "He's not here for a show. He's here for something real." Jake heard enough of that to take it personally. "Come on," he barked, flashing his gloves, then drove in with a staged rhythm, a beat he'd rehearsed on pads, 6-count precise. Chuck refused to dance to it. On the third beat, he wasn't where the fourth needed him to be. On the sixth, there was only rope. Breathing changed. Jake's shoulders rose faster. He blinked sweat out of his eyes that hadn't earned it yet. He tried a shoulder feint. Chuck didn't buy. He tried a low look to set a high shot. Chuck's gaze never followed the bait. Jake threw anyway and hit the top of Chuck's shoulder. Solid, uninteresting, a dull thud that took confidence instead of points. Chuck let a second pass, then stepped in close enough for private volume. "Breathe," he said. Not advice. An instruction. Jake exhaled through his mouthguard, surprised he'd obeyed. He backed out and circled, hands twitching for a tell. It didn't come. Chuck's face held nothing a camera could sell. He was not mysterious. He was honest. No mask to read. No script to outsmart. So Jake returned to what he trusted. Audience. He pointed to the canvas, the old showman's dare. The crowd roared, grateful for something familiar. He lunged. Chuck's feet barely moved. His head did. A slip so small it felt like disrespect. Jake's glove grazed air. The counter didn't arrive. The absence taunted more than a punch would have. Frustration found his hips. He loaded without meaning to. Chuck saw it. The hip, not the glove. The moment stretched, thin as a thread. He did nothing. That was the punishment. He refused to trade chaos for chaos. Jake's corner yelled something about jabs. He complied through gritted teeth. Tap, tap, tap. Chuck parried one with the back of his wrist, palm relaxed, a grandmother shooing a fly. The crowd laughed again, but it sounded different now, caught between habit and doubt. A minute bled away like that. Jake performing work, Chuck erasing it by existing in better time. The sound in the building learned a new volume. Quiet that wasn't boredom, quiet that leaned in. Jake finally caught a touch, a glove skidding along Chuck's guard to brush cheek. The arena cheered like they'd seen a knockdown. Chuck didn't negotiate with their relief. He reset his feet, eyes on Jake's chest, measuring breath, not fame. "I'm right here," Jake said, chest heaving. "Hit me." Chuck's gaze lifted to his eyes and stayed. A long second. Then why? No sarcasm. A genuine question. A question that asked what the fight was for. It landed heavier than any shot had. Jake rushed to cover it with noise. He shoved, crowded, tried to make the ring small. Chuck let rope kiss his back, then pivoted and left Jake holding an outline where a person had been. The crowd groaned, a sound sports fans make when geometry humiliates effort. Somewhere high up, a fan stood and forgot to film. Down ringside, a producer gestured for a camera to find celebrity reaction, then dropped his hand and let the frame stay tight on the two men who mattered. Jake reset his mouth into a grin he didn't feel and threw one last big right, the kind that buys viral. Chuck leaned just enough and let it slide past his ear like a stranger at a door he didn't open. The bell hit, clean, belonging to somebody else's job. No confetti, no music. Air seemed heavier when the sound faded. Jake lowered his arms slow, trying to make it look deliberate. Chuck didn't move at all. He kept watching the man across from him the way carpenters watch a beam. For stress, for bend, for truth. No one in the arena knew why they were whispering. They did it anyway. And then the oddest thing happened. The laughter they'd practiced all week refused to come when they called it. The second round began like a storm pretending to be calm. The crowd had grown quiet enough that you could hear the squeak of the canvas under their feet. Jake stood taller, chest out, trying to prove he hadn't been rattled. His corner had told him to take control early, but control was a language he didn't really speak. Chuck looked unchanged. No theatrics, no pacing. He just raised his gloves, breathed once through his nose, and waited. Jake threw first. A jab, clean, sharp, camera ready. Chuck leaned just enough for it to pass, and before anyone in the front row could blink, he stepped inside. No warning, no wind-up. Just a single, short shot to the body. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It landed with the soft, sick sound of truth. Jake's face froze. He didn't fall, but his knees dipped as if his body had forgotten how to carry his name. For a heartbeat, he wasn't the fighter, or the influencer, or the millionaire showman. He was a man trying to breathe. The crowd went dead quiet. Every voice, every cheer, even the commentators, gone. 1 second of silence stretched into something holy. Then came the noise, one unified gasp, the kind that fills an entire building and still feels small. Jake stumbled back, one hand on his ribs. The pain wasn't unbearable. It was the realization that it had been real. No cut scene, no slow motion, no safety net. Chuck didn't follow. He just stood there, steady, eyes locked on him, waiting. Jake forced himself upright, tried to grin through it. He raised his gloves again, shouting, "That all you got, old man?" Chuck tilted his head, voice low enough that only Jake could hear it. "That's not what you should be asking." He stepped forward again. No aggression, just presence. The kind of movement that reminded Jake of things he didn't want to feel. Time, fear, respect. Jake tried to reset the rhythm. He circled, through combinations, left, right, hook, but they all hit air. Chuck's defense wasn't showy. It was geometry, not drama. He simply wasn't where the punches landed. The commentator whispered, "He's not fighting the man. He's fighting time itself." Jake lunged again, desperate. Chuck moved sideways, caught Jake's arm, and tapped him with a right that barely traveled 6 inches. It wasn't hard enough to drop him, but it broke something else, the illusion. The cameras caught Jake's eyes flickering with confusion. The energy in the building shifted. Chuck spoke again, quiet but clear. "You think this is about power? It's about control." The words weren't meant as taunts. They were lessons. Jake threw one more wild punch, missed, and spun halfway around. Chuck didn't capitalize. He just waited for him to turn back, steady as ever. The crowd could sense it now. This wasn't a fight between two men. It was an education being delivered in real time. Jake's corner shouted instructions, but he couldn't hear them. The sound of his own breathing filled his head. Each inhale felt like fire. Each exhale came with the weight of humiliation. For a moment, he considered quitting, not because of pain, but because he could feel the eyes. Thousands of them, watching a myth fall apart. But pride is a stubborn thing. He straightened, spat blood onto the mat, and forced a smirk. "You done yet?" Chuck's eyes softened, not pity, but understanding. "No," he said quietly. "You haven't learned yet." The bell rang. Chuck turned and walked back to his corner as if the round hadn't even mattered. Jake stood there, chest heaving, trying to find air that wasn't thick with disbelief. The crowd erupted, not with cheers, but with that restless, uncertain applause that people use when they realize they've been watching something real. The camera zoomed in on Jake's face. You could see the moment truth reached him, the same look every fighter gets when they understand that fame doesn't fight back. And somewhere, in the silence after the roar, a single thought formed across 1,000 minds in the stands. This wasn't the end of a legend. It was the reminder that legends never needed saving in the first place. When the bell echoed again for the next round, Jake lifted his gloves, but not in defiance. It was survival now. The performance was gone. What stood there wasn't a star anymore. It was just a man, facing what he'd asked for. The bell ended the round, but the silence that followed was louder than any punch. Jake stayed on one knee, one glove pressed to the mat, the other on his ribs. The ref started forward, counting softly, 1, 2, but Chuck moved before he could reach 3. He didn't raise his hands or celebrate. He didn't even look toward the cameras. He simply reached out. A quiet gesture. Palm open, steady. No demand, no pity, just presence. Jake blinked up through the sweat. He didn't know whether to grab it or slap it away. For a second, pride and pain wrestled inside him. Then he took the hand. Chuck's grip was firm, solid, not the grip of a winner, but of someone lifting another man out of something deeper than a fall. The crowd saw it on the big screens. 2 men, one standing, one still struggling, and a single hand connecting them. Chuck leaned close enough for the mic to barely catch the words. "Don't fight to prove," he said softly. "Fight to understand." The arena froze. The audience stopped shouting. Even the lights felt less harsh, as if the building itself needed to breathe. On the replay screen, the punch wasn't shown, only the gesture. Chuck's hand pulling Jake up. Jake's head bowed. A murmur spread through the stands. Then tears. Grown men, boxers, fans, kids, wiping their faces without shame. At ringside, the commentator finally found his voice. It cracked slightly. "That's not a knockout," he said. "That's grace." For the first time that night, the crowd stood, not to cheer, but to honor something they couldn't quite name. It wasn't victory. It wasn't defeat. It was something older, something honest. Jake straightened, still breathing heavy, eyes wide. The fight had changed him, though he didn't yet understand how. His chest rose and fell like he'd run out of oxygen, but it wasn't his body that hurt. It was the thing inside that realized this moment wasn't about fame anymore. Chuck stepped back, gave him space. No pose, no smile. He just waited until Jake found his balance again. Then he gave a small nod, almost like a teacher telling a student, "You're not done. You're learning." The ref moved between them, unsure what to do. He looked from one man to the other and quietly asked Jake, "You good to continue?" Jake nodded. It wasn't bravado, it was acceptance. The crowd didn't know what to do with the quiet. They'd come for fireworks and found reflection instead. Phones dropped from hands. People forgot to film. The sound that replaced the usual roar wasn't cheering, it was breath. The collective sound of people feeling something real. On the Jumbotron, the director kept replaying the same 3 seconds. The handshake, the pull, the eye contact that lasted a heartbeat too long. Every angle made it more human. A boy near the front tugged his father's sleeve. "Is he okay?" he whispered, pointing at Jake. The father hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Now he is." Jake's corner yelled for him to sit, to regroup, but he waved them off. He stayed standing, eyes fixed on Chuck. "Why'd you stop?" he asked between breaths. Chuck didn't smile. "Because sometimes the hardest hits are the ones you don't throw." The words landed harder than any punch. Jake lowered his gloves, stared for a moment, then gave a single, slow nod. The arrogance was gone. What replaced it was respect. The commentators stayed silent again. You could hear the crowd sniffling, the hum of the lights, the echo of the last bell. No music, no hype, just two men, one who had nothing left to prove, and one who'd finally understood why. Chuck turned away first, walking to his corner without fanfare. Jake watched him go. In that moment, he didn't see an opponent. He saw a mirror, showing him what strength could look like when it wasn't pretending. Somewhere in the rafters, a fan shouted, "That's a real man right there." The sound echoed and disappeared. No one cheered after it. No one needed to. When the second round bell rang, Jake was ready again. But for the first time that night, it wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. And in that quiet between bells, a truth settled over the arena like dust. Legends don't always win by striking. Sometimes they win by stopping. Thousands cried after that first round. It wasn't a headline. It was the truth. They tried to bring the noise back. Lights pulsed. The DJ started a beat. Someone shouted for energy, but the crowd didn't follow. The arena wasn't a circus anymore. It felt like a church that had just witnessed a small miracle. Jake sat in his corner, head bowed, chest heaving. His coach barked orders he didn't hear. "Stay sharp, kid. Second round's yours. Breathe. Reset." But Jake wasn't thinking about rounds. He was thinking about the way that man had looked at him. Calm, steady, like someone who didn't need to win to prove anything. Across the ring, Chuck stood still, gloves hanging loose, eyes down. The cut man offered him a towel. He didn't take it. His breathing was slow, even, as if he hadn't just fought at all. The organizers huddled near the ropes, panic written all over their faces. "We need to stretch this out," one whispered. "Sell the rematch. Push the rivalry." Cameras circled, hungry for angles. The producer's voice cracked through a headset. "We need drama. Give me something." Jake didn't move. He stared at the mat, still hearing that voice. Low and unshakable. "Don't fight to prove. Fight to understand." One promoter leaned over the ropes. "Jake, listen, round two's the moneymaker. Give him a show. People want blood." Jake finally looked up, sweat rolling down his face. "They already saw it," he said quietly. The man blinked. "What are you talking about?" Jake didn't explain. He just shook his head. At the same moment, across the ring, Chuck began to untape his gloves. The ref started to protest, but Chuck wasn't listening. He peeled the wraps off slowly, almost reverently, then walked to the center of the ring. Cameras zoomed in, waiting for a speech. Instead, he bent down and laid the gloves on the mat, palms down, side by side. "I came to fight pride," he said. "Not people." His voice wasn't amplified, but the entire arena heard it. It was the kind of sentence that didn't need volume, just truth. The ref looked lost, caught between procedure and reverence. The announcer stood frozen, card in hand, unable to read from it. The crowd, unsure whether to cheer or stay silent, began to rise one by one. Then, like a tide, they stood together. It wasn't applause at first. It was the sound of people remembering how to feel something real. Then hands started clapping, slow, uneven, growing until the whole arena was standing. No chanting, no screaming. Just steady, honest applause. Jake's trainer touched his shoulder. "Go shake his hand," he whispered. "Do it now." Jake stood, legs unsteady. He walked toward the center, every step heavier than the last. The world around him blurred. Faces, flashes, movement, until all that existed was the man waiting by the gloves. Chuck didn't move. He just watched. Jake stopped a few feet away. He wanted to say something clever, something that would balance the scales, but the words wouldn't come. All he could manage was a nod. Small but real. Chuck returned it, just a dip of the chin, and stepped back. No embrace, no cameras in their faces. Just mutual understanding. The announcer lifted the mic, hesitated, then lowered it again. There were no words for what had just happened. No headline big enough to hold it. The DJ tried to play a victory track, but halfway through the first note, someone cut the power. The silence that followed hit harder than any bass line ever could. Up in the stands, an old man in a veteran's cap started clapping again. People followed. By the third round of applause, the whole arena was roaring, but not for a winner. For what they'd just witnessed, strength without cruelty. As Chuck stepped through the ropes, he turned once and looked back. The lights caught the edges of his face, tired but peaceful. "Hollywood never saved me," he said. "Discipline did." The words echoed through the speakers even though his mic was off. Jake stayed in the ring. He looked down at the gloves lying between them. the symbol of everything he'd misunderstood. His reflection stared back from the smooth vinyl. Not the fighter, not the influencer, just a man realizing how much smaller fame is than respect. He crouched, touched one of the gloves, then let go. It wasn't his to take. People started filing out slowly, whispering like they'd just witnessed something sacred. Reporters lowered their cameras. The ring lights dimmed. Jake exhaled, long and shaky. His corner man offered him a towel. He waved it off. "No," he said softly. "I'm good." But he wasn't. Not yet. The crowd kept clapping as Chuck disappeared through the tunnel, shoulders straight, hands free. Jake stayed behind, staring at the gloves until the arena was nearly empty. That's how it ended. Not with fireworks, not with music. Just quiet. A story no one planned. A lesson no one scripted. And in that silence, Jake Paul realized what everyone in that arena already knew. You don't beat a legend. You learn from one. The days after the fight felt like the quiet after a storm, when the air is still charged, but the thunder's already gone. News outlets couldn't let it go. Every channel ran the same clip. Chuck Norris helping Jake Paul off the canvas, the crowd on its feet, that one sentence echoing through the speakers. Don't fight to prove. Fight to understand. By sunrise, it wasn't just sports media. Morning talk shows were debating it. Podcasts called it the most unexpected moment in combat sports. Twitter turned it into 1,000 edits, quotes, slow-motion montages. But Jake Paul had vanished. No posts. No interviews. No brand deals. His team issued a short statement. Jake is taking time to reflect, and then nothing. For a man who lived online, silence was its own confession. Meanwhile, Chuck went back to Texas. No press conferences. No cameras. Just the same old gym. The one with concrete floors, the smell of metal and chalk, and a radio that never played loud enough to distract from your own breathing. He didn't watch the interviews, didn't care about the hashtags. When a young reporter drove down to his ranch to ask for a reaction to the viral moment, Chuck just said, "If you need a story, find the kid. I already told mine." A week later, Jake reappeared. Not in the ring, not in an ad, but on a small YouTube live stream with no intro music, no sponsor logos. Just him, hoodie pulled up, eyes red, voice lower than usual. "I thought I was fighting a man," he said slowly. "But I was fighting myself. And he showed me how weak pride really is." The chat flooded instantly, half in awe, half in disbelief. He didn't perform. He didn't sell anything. He just sat there, talking about how he'd trained to dominate, not to learn. How he'd forgotten what discipline even meant. "When he hit me," he said, "it wasn't pain. It was like somebody pulled the plug on all the noise I'd been living in." For a long moment, he said nothing, just breathed. Then, "I've spent my life trying to be loud enough to matter." He showed me that quiet's stronger. That clip went everywhere. Again. But this time, nobody laughed. Even the people who used to mock Jake, the old-school boxers, the ex-athletes, started saying it was the first honest thing he'd ever done. An ESPN anchor closed his segment with a single line. He lost the fight, but maybe found himself. A few days later, Jake posted again, just a photo. No caption. A pair of gloves laid side by side on a mat, palms down. The same way Chuck had left his. The comments said it all. He got it. That night, Jake's agent called him, panicked. "You could ride this wave, man. Everyone's talking about redemption. We could book another exhibition, Norris rematch, charity fight. You pick the story." Jake shook his head. "This isn't a story. It's a mirror." "Then what are you going to do with it?" He smiled, small, tired. "Use it." A week later, at a press event in Los Angeles, Jake made his first public appearance since the fight. Cameras flashed, reporters crowded forward, expecting the usual bravado. Instead, he looked calm, grounded in a way that felt foreign to him. "I don't want a rematch," he said. "I want a restart." He paused, scanning the crowd. "There are too many kids out there thinking fame makes you strong. I was one of them. So I'm putting together a charity tournament for young fighters who can't afford training. No sponsors, no bets, just work." The room went silent. Then a voice shouted from the back, "Will Chuck Norris be there?" Jake smiled. "He better be. It's his lesson I'm passing on." He didn't say it with showmanship. He said it like gratitude, like truth. When the cameras turned off, a producer whispered, "That was good TV." Jake corrected him, "That wasn't TV. That was me finally showing up." Later that night, On his private feed, he posted one last clip, a short message, filmed alone in the gym where it all began. "He didn't destroy me," he said. "He rebuilt me." He looked into the camera, steady. "And for once, I'm okay with not being the loudest man in the room." He smiled, not for the audience, but for himself, and turned off the camera. The world had wanted a headline. Instead, it got a human being. The fight was over, but the story wasn't. Because the real match, the one between pride and peace, was just beginning. And this time, Jake wasn't swinging. He was listening. 2 weeks later, America was still replaying 3 seconds that didn't look like boxing. Morning shows cut between weather maps and the slow-motion shot of a hand lifting a man. Podcasts argued about it like theology. Sports radio callers choked up mid-sentence, apologized, and kept talking. Clips piled on clips, black and white edits, orchestral swells, captions in block letters. Thousands cried after the first round. People weren't sharing the punch. They were sharing the pause. Anchors tried names for it: sportsmanship, mercy, old school code. But none of the labels fit right, because what happened in the ring didn't sell a product. It contradicted one. A trending comment read, "That wasn't a fight, that was a sermon." And it stuck, not because anyone wanted church, but because something in the clip told them the room had become one for a minute. In barbershops and break rooms, men who'd never agree on politics agreed on this. The way Chuck took Jake's wrist looked like how fathers used to talk to sons. On veteran forums, the language turned plain and loyal. "We used to fight to survive," one Marine wrote, his avatar a young face in older colors. "Now people fight for clicks." He reminded us the ring still means something. A retired middleweight went viral in a different way. No music, just his kitchen, a squeaking fridge door in the background. "I saw men carry each other like that in the gym," he said, elbows on formica. "You don't do it to humiliate. You do it so they walk out better than they walked in." The clip got stitches from pastors and high school coaches and a woman who ran a shelter. The same sentence kept showing up. "He didn't destroy him. He showed him mercy." Jake posted nothing. For a man who could bend a day's conversation with a thumbnail, the empty square on his feed became its own statement. Brands waited for the next angle. PR emails stacked like drifted mail behind a door nobody opened. Comment sections tried on new tones. Less mockery, more uncertainty, as if the audience wasn't sure which version of him they were allowed to believe now. Chuck vanished like a professional at vanishing. No pressers. No victory lap. A reporter tracked him to a hardware store in Navasota and gamely asked for a quote. Chuck set down a box of screws and answered as if he were discussing weather. "If they didn't understand it in the ring," he said, "they won't understand it in words." The reporter put that line on air. Producers tried to argue with it and ended up replaying it twice. An ESPN panel spent a segment talking about age. It started with numbers, reach, heart rate, power curves, and drifted toward things numbers don't catch: poise, discipline, the way time repays a debt to people who kept showing up when nobody watched. One analyst, a cynic by habit, finally sighed. "Maybe the headline isn't that he's still strong," she said. "Maybe it's that he never mistook attention for respect." Church bulletins quoted the handshake before they quoted scripture that Sunday. A high school principal emailed staff a link and wrote, "Remind our boys." A precinct captain, the kind who never trends, sent the clip to his squad with a single line: "We can do our job like this." The internet did its internet thing anyway. Think pieces argued whether mercy was strategy. Threads insisted the moment had been staged. Another wave pushed back with phone footage from bad angles and cheap seats. Proof that sometimes the worst pixels hold the clearest truth. The argument only made the central image harder to shake. A legend choosing not to finish a man he could. Jake's silence grew teeth. Fans asked where he was not to taunt him, but to see if the quiet meant anything. Old rivals posted guarded respect. Some couldn't bring themselves to tag him and posted just the clip, as if the humility might evaporate if you named the person learning it. A journalist, gray at the temples, kind eyes, voice like gravel, did a 1-minute editorial at the end of the local news, the kind of slot that usually goes to a rescued dog or a graduation parade. He looked into the camera and spoke like he was telling one man a private thing. "He didn't beat Jake Paul," he said. "He reminded everyone what it means to be a man." The line traveled farther than his station's signal ever had. By Friday, it was on billboards someone paid for and on refrigerator magnets no one did. Quote of the week. The networks called it, but it felt older than a week, older than sports. Meanwhile, the clip kept working like a seed thrown into rough ground. A gym owner in Tulsa printed a sign, "Fight TO Understand." A youth coach swapped sparring rounds for 10-minute talks about breathing between bells. A prison chaplain played the handshake to a room that didn't need explanation. A boy in Ohio, whose father hadn't spoken to him since Christmas, sent the link with 2 words, "I'm trying." The producers kept calling Chuck. "Just 10 minutes, they pleaded. "Tell us what you were thinking." He told them the same thing every time. "I wasn't thinking. I was choosing." By the end of the second week, the hysteria cooled into a steadier heat, like coals that could warm a room if you tended them. America was still arguing about everything else. But on this, for a stretch of days longer than news usually allows, the country seemed to agree that what happened in that ring had not been about nostalgia. It had been about permission, to be strong without cruelty, to be right without needing someone else to be small. Somewhere in Los Angeles, a studio booker slammed a laptop shut and muttered that the legend was impossible. Somewhere in Texas, a man swept his gym floor and shook dust out of a mat, the work of years, not weeks. Somewhere in between, a phone buzzed on a kitchen table and did not get answered. When the journalist's line finally landed on a national Sunday roundup, read by a voice that rarely believes in anything, it sounded less like commentary and more like a reminder delivered on time. He didn't beat Jake Paul. He reminded everyone what it means to be a man. And as the credits rolled, some viewers turned off the TV and sat there a minute longer, the living room unusually quiet, the screen reflecting a face they were still deciding what to do with. Somewhere, a gym light flicked on before dawn. Somewhere else, a young man laced gloves slower than he used to. The storm had moved on. The air held its charge anyway. The gym smelled like rust and dusted leather, the kind of air that carried stories you could almost hear if you stood still long enough. The sign above the entrance had half its bulbs burned out, leaving only the word "Ring" glowing in tired yellow light. Jake Paul stood just inside the doorway, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, not like a fighter, but like a man stepping into someone else's memory. It had been months since the world had last seen him. The silence after the storm had stretched so long that most people assumed he'd moved on, back to cameras, back to noise. But here he was, at 5 in the morning, alone in a gym where Chuck Norris once trained. The owner, a weathered man in his 60s, looked up from taping a heavy bag. "Didn't think I'd see a YouTube star here," he said with a half smile. Jake shook his head. "Not a star," he murmured. "Just someone trying to learn." The old man nodded toward the far wall. "He used to train here. 5 a.m. every day. No music, no crowd. Just work." You could hear the clock tick louder than the punches. Jake walked toward the center of the gym. The floor creaked under his steps. He reached up and touched the heavy bag, cracked leather, faded initials carved near the base, C.N. He started throwing slow punches, no rhythm, no swagger, just breath and repetition. Every thud sounded like a confession. He didn't notice the door open behind him. A familiar voice said, "Your stance is still too wide." Jake froze, turned. Chuck Norris stood by the doorway. Jeans, a plain jacket, no entourage, no cameras. The morning light cut across his face, calm as ever. For a few seconds, neither man spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was earned. "I came to learn," Jake finally said. "Not to fight." Chuck stepped closer, his boots quiet on the wooden floor. "Then you're finally ready." He circled the bag once, studying Jake's movements. "Show me." Jake threw another jab, slow, uncertain. Chuck stopped him with a small gesture. "Too much muscle. You're still trying to prove something." Jake exhaled. "Force of habit." Chuck nodded. "That's what pride is. A habit." He positioned Jake's hands again, gently adjusting his shoulders. "It's not about the punch," he said. "It's about the pause before it." Jake frowned, repeating the motion, slower this time, deliberate. The sound of the glove against leather was softer, cleaner. "That's it," Chuck said quietly. "Control doesn't live in the fist. It lives in the space between." They kept training in silence. No cameras, no phones, no commentary. Just the rhythm of breath and the sound of old leather surrendering to purpose. After a while, Chuck stepped back, letting Jake move on his own. Every motion looked different now. Less a performance, more a prayer. When Jake stopped, sweat darkened his hoodie. You really think people can change? He asked, catching his breath. Chuck leaned against the ropes. Change? He thought for a moment. No, I think people remember who they were before the noise. Jake smiled faintly. And if they forget again? Chuck shrugged. Then they find another fight worth losing. A long silence followed, the kind that meant understanding, not emptiness. The old gym owner walked in from the back, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He set them down and grinned. Didn't expect to see this today, he said. The legend and the loudmouth. Chuck looked at Jake. Not loud anymore. The man nodded. No, he said softly. Not anymore. Outside, the sun began to rise. That quiet orange light that makes even the roughest streets look almost gentle. Chuck finished his coffee, placed the mug on the counter, and turned to leave. Fame fades fast, Jake, he said. Character doesn't. Jake didn't answer. He just watched him go. The door creaked shut, and for a few seconds, the gym was perfectly still. Then Jake turned back to the heavy bag. He raised his gloves and threw another punch, slow, balanced, patient. The thud echoed differently this time. Not as a sound of impact, but of rhythm. He didn't look at the camera, because there wasn't one. He didn't care who saw it. For the first time, Jake Paul wasn't fighting for views, applause, or even redemption. He was fighting for silence, and finding peace inside it. The crowd in the small Texas community center was nothing like the Vegas arena. No flashing lights, no smoke machines, no thunderous bass lines shaking the floor. Just folding chairs, a handmade banner that read, Youth Fighters Charity Event, and a quiet hum of anticipation that felt more human than any stadium roar. At the center of it all stood Jake Paul, not in designer shorts or a gold jacket, but in a simple black hoodie. His face looked older, calmer, like time had finally caught up, and shook his hand. Cameras were rolling, but the energy was different. This wasn't a spectacle. It was something closer to redemption. He stepped up to the microphone, adjusted it with a shaky hand, and looked out at the crowd, rows of kids, veterans, trainers, parents. He exhaled, the sound carrying more truth than any line he'd ever delivered online. A few months ago, he began, I thought I knew what strength was. He paused, searching for the right words. I thought it was about followers. Fame. Fear. I thought if people watched me, they'd respect me. A faint murmur rippled through the crowd, but no one looked away. He glanced toward the back of the hall. Chuck Norris was standing there, quietly, arms crossed. No special introduction, no seat on stage. Just watching. Jake continued. Then one night, that old man destroyed me. Not with his fists, with what came after. He smiled faintly. Because when I was on my knees, the world thought the fight was over. But he reached down and lifted me up. That wasn't mercy. That was a challenge. To be better than my own noise. The room was still. Some of the veterans nodded. A few of the younger fighters shifted forward in their seats. He didn't beat me, Jake said. He taught me. That strength without respect is weakness. That fame without purpose is emptiness. And that a man who can stay silent when the world's screaming at him might just be the strongest man alive. Applause began softly, not explosive, but steady, like the sound of something real taking root. As the crowd stood, Jake stepped back from the mic, scanning the room until his eyes found Chuck again. The old man gave a small nod. No smile, no grand gesture, just approval. The kind that doesn't need words. After the event, when the hall emptied and the lights dimmed, Jake found Chuck near the exit. The air outside was cool and quiet, carrying that dry Texas smell of dust and night wind. Jake walked up beside him. I wanted to thank you, he said. Chuck looked out toward the empty parking lot. You already did, he replied. They stood there for a while, saying nothing. The kind of silence that doesn't hang heavy. It settles, like something finding its rightful place. After a moment, Chuck spoke again. The fight never ends, Jake. It just changes shape. Jake looked over. Who am I fighting now? Chuck's answer came soft, almost kind. Yourself. Jake laughed quietly, not out of humor, but understanding. Guess I'll be training a while then. Good, Chuck said. Keep your guard up, but keep your heart open. He patted Jake's shoulder once, the same way a father might before walking away for good. Then he turned toward the dark parking lot, hands in his pockets, disappearing into the night like a man whose work was done. Jake watched him go until the sound of footsteps faded. Then a voice broke the quiet. A boy, maybe 16, was standing near the door, clutching a pair of old gloves. "Hey," the kid asked hesitantly. "Did it hurt when he hit you?" Jake grinned, wiping the sweat from his brow. "No, kid," he said. "It hurt when he didn't." The boy didn't understand right away. But someday maybe he would. Jake handed the kid his own gloves. "Your turn," he said. "Make the fight mean something." The kid nodded, eyes wide, and walked back into the gym. Jake stayed outside a while longer. The lights from the hall flickered behind him, the faint echo of laughter and conversation fading into the dark. Somewhere far off, a bell rang, not loud, but clear, like the memory of a match that had already ended. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the empty lot. Jake closed his eyes and smiled. For once, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Inside, the banner above the ring swayed gently. Someone had added a handwritten note to its edge. Hollywood didn't save him. Humanity did. And for the first time in years, Jake Paul didn't need the world to see him. He just needed to keep becoming someone worth seeing.